The time is 10 a.m. I will now call the regular meeting of the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board to order. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we are conducting the monthly December board meeting today by teleconference. I will now conduct a roll call of board members that are present on this teleconference. When I call your name, please say yes. Steve Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Coburn.
Yes.
Dr. May.
Yes.
Thank you. Candace White.
Yes.
Heather Allen.
Yes.
Keith Joy. So Keith has not joined us yet. Okay. Mr. Talley, are there any introductions this morning?
No, Chairman Powell. Sorry, Chairman Hilton. That was a flashback.
It's okay. Are there any public recognitions this morning?
No, sir.
Okay. The minutes of the public meeting, the public hearing meeting, and the strategy committee meetings, we have 3 sets of minutes that we need to approve this morning. You already received the minutes. The public hearing minutes held on November 18, 2020. Are there any changes to the minutes by board members for the public hearing minutes?
No changes.
No changes? Okay. Minutes stand approved. Now the regular board meeting held on November 18, 2020. Are there any changes to the minutes by board members?
No changes.
Hearing none, the minutes are approved. The strategy committee minutes held on December the 9th, 2020. Are there any changes to the minutes by the strategy committee members?
No changes.
No change. Thank you. The minutes stand approved. Thank you. Public comment. Mrs. Hamilton, has anyone registered to make a statement this morning?
No, sir. I've not received any calls or emails.
Has anyone provided written comments?
No, sir.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make a brief comment on this teleconference? Please raise your hand by teleconference and you will be called on. This is a feature you can find on the participants list or by pressing *3 if joining by phone, and you will be called on. Mrs. Hampton, does anyone else wish to speak? Does anyone?
I see any requests. Mr. Purdon, do you?
I do not see any request either.
Thank you very much. That completes the public comment portion of the meeting. Moving on to unfinished business. There is no unfinished business this morning. New business is Mrs. Hampton going to give us a brief overview of this new business involving the involving the Air Quality Trust Fund request. Mrs. Hampton.
Thank you, Chairman Hilton. As you may recall, Evolve KY came before the board last month and made a request for a disbursement of funds from the Air Quality Trust Fund to fund a charging station at Jefferson Memorial Forest. As background, the Air Quality Trust Fund is regulated under APCD Regulation 1.17. The board may approve, by action at its meetings, disbursement for conducting and funding air quality research and development projects, special non-recurring air quality projects, and air quality education programs. At the present time, there's a balance of $18,820.33 in the Air Quality Trust Fund. At the present time, the board at its meeting in 2019 approved an up to $8,000 encumbrance for a targeted air quality messaging campaign and information project in a 6 neighborhoods area, generally referred to as the Green Heart Project. To date, there have been no disbursements against that grant from the board. That project, unfortunately, has been somewhat delayed by COVID and also our lawsuit on Nord. In December of 2016, the board approved a request from Louisville Groves to sponsor a charging station at the Healthy House in the Portland neighborhood. That disbursement was $2,500. It's my understanding that Stuart Unger with Evolve KY is in attendance today and available to answer any questions that the board may have. And with that, Chairman Hilton, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. The board members, if you've heard the request for funding from Evolve at the last meeting, is there a motion to approve the funding request? Can I get a
ask a
second?
question first?
Yes.
Rachel, the $18,000, is that net of the 8,000 and the 2,500?
The $2,500 has already been dispersed from the fund. Its current balance is $18,800, and that is subject to that up to $8,000 grant from the board. So it leaves roughly $10,000 unencumbered at the present time.
Okay, thank you.
Another comment, just can you let the board know how the funds are placed into the trust? So I know that there's been fees, that was assessed by companies, and that's how we funded the trust. But are there any other mechanisms, or, it's a finite amount? Okay.
Ms. Hamilton?
My apologies for that. We'll pull up the reg so that I get all of the important things in here for us. So the regulation itself specifies how money can be contributed to the Air Quality Trust Fund. The board may accept money by grant, gift, donation, bequest, civil or criminal penalty or other conveyance, but not penalties that are collected under KRS 77.990. That is the district's primary authority for assessing civil penalties. So our own civil penalties that are assessed by the district cannot be used to fund the Air Quality Trust Fund. It is maintained by Louisville Metro government in an interest-bearing account, and that interest is annually assessed and moved into the account at the end of the fiscal year, which ends June 30th.
So basically, I think most of the funding comes from individual donations, or is that included in your operating budget every year, Mrs. Hamilton?
The funds in the Air Quality Trust Fund may only come from the type of funding streams that I mentioned. Sometimes those are from, sometimes they are also from companies, but there are voluntary gifts, grants. I'm not sure we've ever gotten requests, but if someone would like to leave us the Air Quality Trust Fund in their will, I'd really support that.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the funding request? Can I get a second from a board member, please?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussions regarding the funding request?
I have concerns that it really, it's a good concept, but I don't know that it really helps the central, metro area and the areas that would be affected more. And since it's a finite resource, I'd like to see it directed, more towards that direction. I think that it's also a funding of a privilege that is probably going to be benefited by those who don't necessarily need that benefit. But, but I like the concept as a general, but we've, and that's where the charging station at the Portland House made sense to me, but at Jefferson Memorial Forest, sure that it makes sense to me.
Mrs. Hampton, the Jefferson Memorial Forest, is that the Burnham Forest location?
No, it's Jefferson Memorial Forest.
Where's that located?
It's located just off 65. It's, Bernheim is off 65, but that's towards the, in the east direction. Jefferson Memorial is, in the west direction.
Okay.
It's a little bit closer to the Beltway than Bernheim. Yeah.
It is located in the just south of the Firdale community, south of Outer Loop.
Okay. Thank you. We will now have a roll call vote on the approval of funding. Please say yes if you wish to approve or no if you do not. Steve Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Colbert.
Yes.
Dr. May.
No.
Candace White.
Yes.
Heather Allen.
Yes.
Keith Joy, has he joined us yet? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 yes and 1 no and 1 absent. So it looks like this motion will be approved. Moving on to the committee reports. The strategy committee met on December 9th. Dr. Colbert, would you report on the outcome of that meeting, please?
Sure. The strategy committee met on December 9th and reviewed proposed amendments to Regulation 5.15, Chemical Accident Prevention Provisions, version 4. Those would replace version 3 of the amendment, which has been in place since the early 2000s. And we'll soon hear a summary of those amendments by Byron Gary. In any case, the district had recommended that we release the proposed amendments to Regulation 5.15 for a 60-day period open for public comments. And the strategy committee voted to approve the release of the amendments for public comment. And accordingly, APCD has released the proposed amendments for public comment on December 11th. So basically, we approved the proposed amendments, and you'll hear about them soon.
Thank you, Dr. Colbert. So
You're welcome.
just to make sure, the public comment period for this started December 11th. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think it goes to February 9th that the district will take public comments.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions regarding the strategy committee report from any board members? If not, thank you, Dr. Colbert. Staff reports. Mr. Talley, we're at the director's report, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Hilton, and good morning to the board and our guests. I trust all had a pleasant and safe Thanksgiving, and lest I forget, I want to likewise wish everyone a safe and happy time for the remainder of the holiday season. I'm going to start this morning with a little national news and update. As they are required, the U.S. EPA had been reviewing whether to lower the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for PM 2.5. The current standard is 12 micrograms, and lowering it to 8 to 10 micrograms had been under consideration. Ultimately, U.S. EPA decided not to change the standard, which remains at 12 micrograms. Currently, Louisville has a design value of 10 micrograms, which is well under the current standard. But I wanted to take just a minute and make a few points on why I felt it important to raise this issue this morning. Over the last several years, research and medical studies have shown an increasing link between PM 2.5 and various health impacts, not just pulmonary concerns, but also cardiac, especially for people with chronic lung and heart conditions, and particularly for the young and the old. Additionally, there have been studies that have indicated an adverse impact from PM in conjunction with the coronavirus. One study estimating an 8% increase in the number of COVID deaths. Locally, the ambient concentrations of PM appear to be fairly consistent at our monitoring sites, with current design values ranging from a high of 10 at our Watson Lane and our Durant Lane monitors to a low of 9.2 at the Cannons Lane monitor. The remaining PM monitor at Algonquin is coming in at about 9.6. So while we are currently safely under the standard, we should continue to explore ways to reduce PM 2.5, this in light of medical evidence, and then expecting at some point U.S. EPA will review this standard again with a likelihood of lowering that standard as additional health impacts are substantiated. So I just wanted to put that out there and keep that foremost before the board, because I would expect that, one, from a health standpoint, we need to keep our eye on it, and then with a real expectation that standard will ultimately be lowered. As I indicated at the last board meeting, the district would be participating in the Land Development Code Reform Community Meeting this past Saturday, which was focused on environmental justice. There had been 2 previous meetings focused on housing, and there was a community meeting last night to focus on the process and the next steps for that reform process. Ultimately, they will go back to council with proposed revisions for their review. The meeting Saturday was really well attended. It included presentations from the Urban Institute, Metro Planning and Design Services, Develop Louisville, covering brownfields, and then there was a video presentation and live comments from Arnita Gatson for a community perspective on this issue. And then, of course, from APCD presentation provided by Michelle King and Brian Gary, along with some comments from Rachel Hamilton. There were also many comments, questions, and concerns from the community, some pertaining to the district. Once we receive a transcript of the chat questions and oral comments, I will share those with the board for a fuller discussion of those comments that pertain to the district. But I would also like to point out that because of the number of presentations, that led to limited time for each presentation and really prevented the district from being able to provide the type of detailed presentation that may have addressed some of the questions and concerns. Additionally, more time would have allowed the district to better frame the environmental justice issues relative to needed reforms of the Land Development Code. Therefore, we are discussing internally the need for the district to conduct a separate environmental justice community meeting or forum to better inform the community and provide a much more detailed analysis of how land use regulations and past patterns of land use have exacerbated harmful environmental conditions and impacted communities, and highlighting what APCD has long said, which is that environmental justice is not something that APCD alone can address fully by itself. So I will keep the board apprised of the progress and timing of a future meeting on this topic. This is really just a quick note because this has been before the board, and I wanted to make you aware that the board has been in ongoing communications with MSD, Metropolitan Sewer District, but with the Thanksgiving holiday, their internal review has taken a little longer than expected. However, we do plan to present the agreed board order related to their NOV to the board in January for your approval or not. This next topic is really pretty interesting, but more importantly, it speaks to the comprehensive nature of environmental justice. Through a series of referrals, I was contacted by Brooke Pardue of the Louisville Parks Foundation. We were recommended as an agency that would be a good resource in their new project. The Louisville Parks Foundation is proposing the development of an equitable and transparent investment plan for the Louisville Parks and Recreation System, as directed by their board. The underlying mission of this work will be to ensure equitable access to and equitable investments in parks and recreation services for all Louisvillians, while utilizing a very transparent decision-making process. In our initial meeting with them, it was indicated that their work would focus on those communities in most need first, making access to quality parks more equitable. They plan on having robust community input to help drive their planning and their implementation. And lastly, they want APCD input and guidance to ensure there are no adverse air quality impacts, and conversely, to identify if there are things that they can do that will enhance air quality. It is my hope and my goal to be able to have them to come and present on their plans more comprehensively at a future board meeting. As an aside, in that meeting, we learned about the Maple Street Park project in California neighborhood, and I just wanted to speak to that briefly. This is important because California neighborhood is an environmental justice community with major industry located within its boundaries. And as I have said earlier, environmental justice is not APCD's alone to address, and this park will become a valuable community asset. The project will transform roughly about 23 acres of vacant property in the California neighborhood into a vibrant public park that supports the community's vision for the future. They've already had numerous conversations with the community, and they have been involved in what to do with that property. Over the next 2 years, efforts will focus on launching the equitable development planning process and the next phase of community engagement, enabling responsible acquisition of the final properties needed to complete the park footprint. The vast majority of that property is already been acquired from MSD. It was property that MSD acquired through a FEMA grant because of heavy flooding in that area. They will then do a process completing the planning, design, and capital fundraising, and then begin the start of construction of multi-purpose athletic fields and nature play areas. The Maple Street project will represent, because it's located in a fully developed urban area, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to bring a significant new asset to an underserved urban neighborhood, strengthening the social fabric of that community. This past week, I had the privilege and pleasure to participate in a global panel discussion entitled Looking Ahead, the Role of Citizen Science in Compliance and Enforcement. The event was sponsored by the Environmental Law Institute, and there were well over 200 participants who had signed up. There were panelists that represented both water and air concerns. And what I tried to bring was the regulatory perspective to the conversation, specifically speaking to the need to have robust conversation prior to any citizen science project and establishing clear goals and expectations, specifically making sure there is a clear understanding of what can, should, and will be done with any data that is produced. I was asked, as were all the panelists, to sign a grant of license, which gives permission to share the video and the program content. So out of an abundance of caution, I'll make a much fuller report to the board next month once everyone has completed that license, and I feel comfortable providing that information. But that will also give them a time to prepare a draft summary and a comprehensive synthesis that will capture the major takeaways and then include the feedback that they received from that panel discussion. So you can look forward to that for next month's board meeting. This next topic, before I get into it, I really want to stress just the amount of work that the air monitoring staff put in to bring us to this point. They had to overcome many, many technical obstacles to get us here today, but I am incredibly happy to let the board know that we will be sending them an email with a draft air toxics report following this board meeting, and that we'll be adding this to the board report in January. There will be a full presentation at the board's January meeting explaining the report, and what I'm asking is for the board of the board is for their input about what would make this report more useful, more beneficial, will make it clear for everyone who looks at it. We will also be posting a copy on the board's webpage for the public to review. As I indicated, it has taken an incredible amount of work. Andrea Cooley, Brian Paris, and our air monitoring staff, other members of the air monitoring staff have worked diligently over the last couple of years to get us to this point. They have been leaders nationally in bringing the work of this GC, the gas chromatograph, to the point where we can get a high level of confidence in the data that we'll be able to provide. And still with that, we cannot provide data for all of the VOCs that we would like to at this point. We're still continuing to work on that, but we've reached a point and a level that we have high enough confidence in those VOCs that we'll be presenting that we think it's time to bring that to your review and to the review of the public. So just incredibly excited about this, and again, cannot overstress the amount of diligent work that it took to bring us to this point. And then lastly, if there are no questions for me at this point, as part of the director's report, there will be an update presentation on the risk management program amendment provided by Byron Gary, our APCD regulatory coordinator. So Chairman Hilton, if there are no questions for me, I will turn it over to Byron.
One quick question. Will the board members receive the our toxic report prior to the January meeting?
Yes. We plan to send that out sometime this week. So you will have it to review prior to that meeting. And I did that so you can take a look at it and you'll be better situated after hearing the presentation to provide comments and input and any changes that you think will make it a better report.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Keith, it's Dr. May.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, and I think those are wonderful projects, and those are all horizontal, and the West End is it's already built up, and so I was wondering if there was any looking into any type of vertical gardens, on any kind of buildings or anything like that to have more green, though it's not useful, but it would be better for air, for the ambient air in that area.
They didn't mention any of that, and I can bring it up the next meeting just to see if that the Louisville Park Foundation has considered that. And Rachel, I want to say that I remember someone had a vertical garden at the South Community Center on the wall. Do you remember that?
You're absolutely correct. And if my colleague Michelle King could be elevated, I believe that she can give a little bit of background about that project. I hope. Sorry to put you on the spot, Michelle.
I also like the idea because it was not a high maintenance for the residents per se. Because when we talk about, tree planting and all that, there was that concern about maintenance. And of course, there's still maintenance on a vertical garden, but it would not be by the residents.
When we were doing some of the work with the urban heat island and the tree canopy discussion, I do remember there was a really good presentation that was provided about vertical gardens, and they showed opportunities for how you could use them in downtown corridors and in other parts of the community. And so I know it's been a topic that's been discussed locally, but I haven't really heard much about it lately. But as I said, at the next opportunity to speak to the folks at the Louisville Parks Foundation, I will inquire to see if they've had any discussions about that.
So just to answer Assistant Director Hamilton's question, there is a green wall installation at the Southwick Community Center, and that was a project that came out of the Center for Neighborhoods Neighborhood Institute, and one of their members identified that as something that she wanted to take on, and she actually worked to secure some funding from one or more of the Rubbertown area companies. They can be quite expensive to install. There's a lot of infrastructure needed, obviously, to put plants up in the air as opposed to in the soil. So, but that was completed the summer before this past summer, and there was a community planting day, and a local artist also worked with that resident, and they used 2 different types of sedums on the wall, which should be lower maintenance, and so that they could spell out when in bloom the word unity. Have not had the opportunity to follow up on that in the current situation. They were able to secure some assistance for watering from the Louisville Water Company because obviously that's the biggest type of maintenance needed when you're talking about putting up green walls is getting water to those plants. So that's one that we know of. As Director Talley mentioned, green walls are often discussed in dense downtown areas where there's not space or soil, honestly, for supporting plant life. There's often underneath the sidewalks we're walking on, it's just more infrastructure and there's not actually soil to put them in. So that can be a strategy to get some green space into a very dense area, but it is certainly a more expensive and maintenance intensive proposition than green space that's more traditional.
Thank you for the update. Are any questions from Mr. Talley's staff report or Mrs. Kane from board members? If not, thank you very much. And I guess we'll move on to our presentation.
Thank you, Byron, and we will bring you up and allow you to take us forward.
Thank you, Director Talley and Chairman Hilton. And Andy, if we could have DJ Fountain made a presenter as well, he'll be speaking during a portion of this presentation on the local implementation. I'm going to share a presentation with the board today on Regulation 515, Chemical Accident Prevention Provisions, which, as Dr. Coburn described, was approved by the Strategy Committee for release for public comment. Back on December 9th, we did officially publish the public notice on December 11th. This is also commonly known as the Risk Management Plan Program, or RMP program, for the plans that companies are required to put in place. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the RMP/chemical accident prevention provisions. This is a different program from much of the rest of what the district implements in its scope and aim. And then I'll give a bit of an overview on where we are right now and what has been proposed. So starting with that overview, the chemical accident prevention provisions were created in the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments in new Section 112R of the Clean Air Act. As Congress was amending the Clean Air Act, they recognized the need for provisions not just to clean up the air, but to prevent accidents such as the still recent at the time disaster in Bhopal, India, which killed several thousand people. So they included in the amendments a new Section 112R that required EPA to adopt rules requiring certain companies to put in place risk management plan or chemical accident prevention plans. EPA adopted that initial rule in 1996, and 3 years later delegated authority to APCD to implement that program locally. If DJ has been made available, if you're able, DJ, you want to give an overview of the program and implementation here in Louisville?
Yes, thanks, Byron. So essentially, the core elements of the risk management plan are the hazard assessment. That includes a look at the different hazards that are presented by the process and analysis of how a catastrophic event might happen so that things can be put in place to prevent those from happening. The prevention program, which includes measures to make sure that equipment is mechanically sound, that processes are run appropriately, that things such as operating procedures are spelled out so that the safe operation is clear to the operators, and insurance that training is completed appropriately and on a regular basis. And the response program, which in some cases may be that a company spells out the conditions and procedures for notifying local emergency response facilities such as 911, or in the case of some companies, they choose to have a response program that includes their own trained and equipped responders on site. So these are the three major elements. Of course, there's a lot more that goes into it, but it's a little bit more involved than I would go into in this forum. So in Louisville, we, prior to my time, set this program up to be jointly administered with APCD and the Emergency Management Agency, which at the time, the APCD was a county agency and the EMA was a city agency. Obviously, since merger, those two are under the same umbrella. But at the time, Emergency Management Agency provided and still provides the expertise in inspecting and also in responding to any kind of events that may happen. The Air Pollution Control District is responsible for administering, collecting funds, and providing any enforcement that may become necessary. So some of the benefits of this locally is that our inspection frequency is spelled out in our memorandum of agreement with EMA to be every 3 years. I like to contrast that with EPA, which administers a good portion of the rest of the country. Their goals are about 250 inspections over a total year. And that is for 13,500 approximately RMP subject facilities. So our inspection frequency is greatly enhanced by local administration of this program. In addition, we can provide compliance assistance and make sure that the companies that have any kind of non-compliance are returned to compliance quicker.
Thank you, DJ. And I once again forgot to properly introduce DJ, who is our industrial compliance supervisor. He also has been the one here at the district who actually carries forward the RMP program implementation from our end. And it's through his expertise and time that we have been able to maintain the delegation of the program. As he mentioned, most of the rest of the country, the programs implemented by EPA were one of about 9 areas in the country that have maintained delegation to implement the program locally. Some areas have accepted delegation and found it too burdensome and had to return the program back to EPA even. Just a little overview of RMP facilities here within Louisville. These are the locations. The red facilities are the chemical manufacturing facilities. The dark gray or black facilities are everything else. And this is over a map of the percent persons of color within Louisville, which highlights why this is an environmental justice issue of concern to the community, as we have heard a number of times from them. Concern of living at the fence line of these large facilities, particularly in the Rubbertown area in the west, which is directly next to, of course, Louisville's African-American population. And some of the facilities around the airport are also closer to a number of other non-white communities. So we do hear concerns from these communities, and it is an issue that has been of concern for some time. In addition, Louisville is unique in that we have a large proportion of chemical facilities per capita. So for medium or larger cities, we are 4th in the nation in the number of chemical facilities. NAICS, that's North American Industrial Classification System 325. Those are chemical manufacturing facilities. We're 4th in the nation behind Harris County, Texas, Summit County, Ohio, and Greenville County, South Carolina. So we have a large number of those facilities for a city of our size. Going to move a little bit into more recent history and what exactly the district has proposed at this time. There are two recent EPA actions to speak of. One was in January 2017. EPA passed the RMP Amendments rule. And then in 2019, the RMP Reconsideration rule. So they sound a lot alike, but they're two different rules. And they both stem from the executive order issued by the president after the disaster in West Texas in 2013, where a fertilizer distribution facility caught fire and then exploded, killing about a dozen people, primarily first responders, and leveling a good portion of the outskirts of that town. So a large disaster at the time. The president issued an executive order mandating that a number of different rules and programs from different agencies be reviewed. The RMP program was one of them. In January 2017, EPA did adopt amendments to the RMP program. But then in March 2017, EPA convened reconsideration proceedings based on petition from a number of states and industry groups. And then in 2019, finalized the RMP reconsideration rule. Just an overview of what was done in each of those actions. The RMP Amendments rule implemented a number of new provisions listed along the left side of this table. The first two, the third-party audit and incident investigation root cause analysis, were required of facilities with program level 2 or 3 processes. The RMP program has 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3, depending on the potential for offsite consequences. As you go up in program levels, the greater chance there is essentially for offsite consequences if there were to be an accident at one of these facilities. And both of these first two new requirements were required after either an RMP reportable accident or a catastrophic release or near miss. Previously, there was a requirement for an investigation afterwards, but it was not required to be a third-party audit, and there was not a sort of systematized direction for how to carry forward those incident investigations. The next provision, the Safer Technology Alternatives Analysis, or STAA, was required just of facilities at program level 3 within the NAICS codes for paper manufacturing, petroleum and coal products manufacturing, or chemical manufacturing. So this would be NAICS codes 322, 324, and 325. EPA found in reviewing the rule that these were the facilities that were either the most likely to have accidents, or when there were accidents, to have the greatest impact, both on-site and off-site. So for these companies, all processes were required to be reviewed, and the company was required to determine if they were safer alternatives to those processes or chemicals being used, and then to assess the practicability of implementing those new processes or switching out chemicals. And this was required every 5 years. In addition, there were updates for response coordination activities and emergency response exercises. The facilities with program level 2 or 3 processes were required to conduct response coordination activities at least once a year. And facilities, as DJ mentioned, that have their own response programs were required to conduct full field exercises every 10 years and tabletop exercises every 3 years to practice their actual response if there were to be an emergency. Finally, there were new information sharing provisions for all regulated facilities. There was a new ongoing requirement to notify the public of how to reach the company to request publicly available information, and what was publicly available was modified as well. There was also a requirement to host a community meeting within 90 days of any reportable accident at any RMP facility. So those were the January 2017 amendments. And then the reconsideration rule in 2019 modified or rescinded most of those provisions. The third-party audit, incident investigation root cause analysis, safer technology alternatives analysis, and emergency response coordination activities were rescinded completely. and the emergency response exercises were maintained. However, EPA stated they believe that companies and local emergency response agencies could determine appropriately on their own how often those actually needed to be conducted. So they returned some flexibility to the companies. In addition, they rescinded the ongoing information sharing requirements, but kept the requirement to have a community meeting within 90 days of a reportable accident. So these are the provisions that remain after the reconsideration in 2019. These would be the minimum that that APCD needs to adopt to maintain delegation of the program. Right now, our rule is less stringent. As Dr. Coburn mentioned, it hasn't been updated since the early 2000s. So at a minimum, we would need to adopt these provisions to stay in step with EPA. However, what APCD has proposed after having considered the options were to retain the third-party audit and incident investigation root cause analyses. These are the provisions that are only required after an accident or a catastrophic accident or a near miss. However, we would only require them for those same NAICS codes that EPA determines to be the riskiest, the paper manufacturing, coal and petroleum products manufacturing, and most importantly for Louisville, the chemical manufacturing industries. In addition, APCD has proposed to keep the Safer Technology Alternatives Analysis, or STAA provisions, however, require them only for new processes. These would still be for just program level 3 companies within those same industries. However, we have proposed limiting it even further than the amendments, but going farther than what's currently in the rule after reconsideration, requiring this for new processes. APCD has not proposed reinstating the emergency response coordination activities or mandating a certain frequency for the emergency response exercises. We believe through our local delegation that we have maintained a pretty good rapport with all of the companies, particularly those that have their own emergency response programs. Through APCD and EMA's working relationship with them, we do believe that we can properly implement the emergency response exercises in particular with appropriate level of frequency. We've also not proposed reinstating any of the information sharing provisions. One of the justifications from EPA for rescinding that provision was national security concerns. We do not have, we feel at this time, enough justification to override EPA's concerns there. However, as was left in place after the reconsideration rule, companies would still be required to have a community meeting within 90 days of any reportable accident. And just really quickly where we are in the process, this is our normal regulatory process. We identify regulations internally or through suggestions and need from the community. We scope them internally and form a work group and draft some proposal internally, and then release it for, particularly when it is a potentially controversial action, for informal public review prior to formally publicly proposing it, and have public meetings. Then we'll bring it to the appropriate board committee and release it for formal public review and public hearing prior to board action. And those are all the places where there are opportunities for participation. In this instance, where we are right now, we have identified the need internally, scoped out. Rather than drafting an actual proposal internally, we drafted an advance notice of proposed rulemaking where we presented a range of options rather than specific suggestions on what we thought at the time needed to be adopted. Those were reviewed internally and released for informal public review, and we had a couple of public meetings where we had question and answer sessions with the community. We took that informal public review and the questions we received during the public meetings and released an informal response to comment documents, and then went back to that internal drafting stage. As you see, during our process, many of these processes can go back a step before moving forward. At that point, we did internally draft a proposal which we put out for the public to review, and hosted an additional public meeting where we could sort of informally discuss with the community and take questions prior to bringing that proposal to the strategy committee last week. Or the week before, no, last week, sorry. We did bring that to the strategy committee last week. They approved it for release for formal public review. That process is ongoing right now. It is out for public review, and we will be hosting a public hearing as well at the January board meeting. Finally, after this formal public review process and public hearing is when we may be bringing our formal recommendation for final board action to the board at some point and next year, hopefully. With that, just the timeline moving forward, we are actually, sorry, this was not updated after the strategy committee, sorry. We are in this formal comment period right now, which goes until February 9th. We will be hosting that public hearing on January 20th at the board meeting. And then some point next year, hopefully we will bring final recommendations to the board, and the implementation of the new provisions goes out as far as 2025 for some of the requirements. All of these proposals are available at louisvilleky.gov/APCD/dockets, the draft regulation 515 version 4, as well as our preliminary regulatory impact assessments and a brief fact sheet. Please join us for that comment period and public hearing, particularly on January 20th. You can send comments to airregs@louisvilleky.gov or via regular mail to Rachel Hamilton, Board Secretary Treasurer, 701 West Ormsby Avenue, Louisville, Kentucky, 40203. And also be sure to hit that link if you haven't already to subscribe for future updates from the district. With that, I'll turn it back over to the board, to Mr. Tyler, rather, sorry.
Chairman Hilton, that really completes the director's report. And again, if there are any questions from board members, we'd be happy to address those.
I have a question for Byron. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this just for some background information. On the map you showed with the red dots and the black dots, the black dots were the non-chemical manufacturing industries or facilities. And I just wondered, and it was about half and half, roughly, about 9 of one, 11 of the other. In that group of, I think it was 11 non-chemical manufacturing plants. What sorts of facilities does that include?
DJ would be really better to answer that question. From my recollection, a lot of them are ammonia-related refrigeration, particularly warehouses are probably the next largest number, but DJ can give you more detail.
That's right, Byron. Most all of them are ammonia refrigeration, and it's related to food distribution. Of course, we have a pork processing plant, and they use a ammonia refrigeration system to cool the product. The rest of it is subsequent to the distribution of food.
So the concern is release of ammonia, I guess, from the refrigeration system or from storage of ammonia?
Right. It's an anhydrous ammonia. It tends to, if it is released from the facility, it tends to combine with moisture in the air and be less of a concern once you get a little bit away from the facility. Generally, the largest risk is to the actual people on site, employees. But we have had occasional releases, none to my recollection that caused any off-site consequences such as sheltering in place, with the exception of possibly American Cold Storage, which I think was in 2009.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions from board members? I have several Yes.
I have a question. Just
Yes.
This is Steve Sullivan. These amendments, these are the first for many years, and it's kind of like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, in essence, because they were proposed in 2017 and then backed off some. Is that my understanding?
So at the EPA level, yes. In 2017, they adopted the RMP amendments, which took 2 steps forward, I guess, as far as the level of stringency. And then the reconsideration rule in 2019 did step back on some of those. Most of those provisions were never actually implemented. As I mentioned at the end, many of them take a number of years before they became effective anyway. And when EPA convened those reconsideration proceedings in 2017, they put a stay on many of those provisions.
And when was the last time that APCD revived?
Ours was either 2001 or 2003.
That's okay. But so looking through the amendments or the edits, the changes, you're cleaning up a lot of stuff, I'm assuming.
So yeah, there are a lot of changes. The EPA program had not been changed much since 2003 or so either. The district had been looking for some time at adopting a number of minor amendments that EPA had done since that time. But it was more minor things like requiring companies supplying email address along with the phone number for their contact, rather than the level of changes that are proposed now. If you're looking at the red line strikeout, most of those changes are the result of the more recent actions.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I have several questions. This is Chairman Hilton. Is it possible that we could get a list of the chemical manufacturing facilities in West Louisville?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure we could provide a full list. I believe there are 19 facilities citywide right now, but we can give them with addresses. Yeah.
Yeah, with zip code, that'd be great. And the second thing, I got a question. Who's a keeper of the risk management plan? Is it the emergency management department, or is it APCD? Who has the reports?
So it depends which portion you're referring to exactly. Again, I'll probably go to DJ for the answer on this one, but generally the companies themselves come up with the risk management plans for their facilities and keep them on site for their employees to have to reference to know what to do. And then the Emergency Management Agency, or EMA, through their partnership, their MOU with us, will go out every 3 years and inspect the RMP plans as well as the implementation of those. But DJ can give you more detail on the exact locations there.
And Byron's correct. The bulk of the plan is at the actual facility. The day-to-day, we're going to do X and Y and Z is at the facility, and that's what we inspect when we go out. What's required to be submitted to EPA is a registration. So it basically has some of the high-level details. It's got an executive summary and some other things like that. Those are filed with EPA through what's called the Central Data Exchange. So it's an electronic system. We have access to that, so we actually don't house any of the registrations, but it is available to us and to EMA at any time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Chairman Hilton, this is Ms. Hamilton. I just wanted to remind board members that not all facilities in Rubbertown are under the RMP program. That is a discrete list of 21 companies, and we will provide that information for the 21 RMP facilities that are here in Louisville, and also identify which ones are in the NAICS code for chemical manufacturing versus those that simply are in the program because they have threshold amounts of anhydrous ammonia on site.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you very much. Any other questions from board members? If not, Byron, thank you for a very detailed report, and looking forward to this list. Very good presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Hilton.
Moving on to our quality data, Mrs. Hamilton submitted that report yesterday. Are there any questions regarding the air quality report?
This is related a little bit, but Rachel, you had sent out the letter from the state, and that has obviously something to do with the ozone. And I was just curious, what's the time frame that I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about now, but the time frame that for the legislature to make a decision related to reformulated gas, is that sometime down the road?
So that's a great question. It's a little bit complex, so let me try to answer it. The use of reformulated gas is a control strategy within APCD's state implementation plan. We are using it to bring the area into compliance for the ozone national and air quality standard. In order to that control measure from our implementation plan, we would have to find a surplus permanent amount of emissions to offset the emission reductions we get from reformulated gas. We were not able to identify an offsetting emission reduction. And at this point in time, we're recommending for the General Assembly that RFG remain in our suite of control measures. The governor opted the area into and if to opt out of reformulated gas is a control measure that at the state level by the governor, we still in this area would have to find surplus and additional emission reductions. And I apologize, audio is difficult to hear on your end.
So the letter, I didn't really read where it actually recommended that they opt in essence. I mean, did I miss that? Or is that another set of correspondence and community?
The opt-in and the process for formulated gas control measure for the area happened in the mid-90s.
So the charge now just simply
Andy, I'm sorry.
Another. Go on.
Yes, I apologize. Andy. Yes, in terms of that reformulated gas, when we were opted into that program here in Kentucky as a control measure, our area was in non-attainment for the ozone standard in place at that time. And as a requirement for meeting the national ambient air quality standards, we were required to adopt some form of gasoline management. Our neighbors across the river in Clark and Floyd County use RVP gasoline, read vapor pressure gasoline, because they're our metropolitan statistical area, and they too had to come up with reductions to bring us into compliance with our prior ozone standard. They continue to use read vapor pressure gasoline. Because the governor here in Kentucky in the mid-1990s opted the area into reformulated gas, that's the type of gasoline control measure that we use. The General Assembly were interested in understanding whether or not the reductions that the agreed board order with Louisville Gas and Electric, for example, would be sufficient emission reductions for us to substitute that control measure for reformulated gas. And unfortunately for our area, last summer, we did not reach attainment with the current, more stringent ozone standard. And as a result, until our standard, eliminating RFG as a control measure is something that we believe would be unwarranted. And that's what the letter has sent back to the Kentucky General Assembly. in the House of Representatives to let them know that we are looking at all control strategies we can find because it's incumbent on us to get the area into attainment. But for the moment, we're going to retain RFG as part of that suite of control measures.
So in other words, there's no action that the legislature is going to take.
It's my understanding that that's the current state. I will, what the General Assembly may choose to do is always
Up to them.
to them. Exactly.
All right. Thank you.
And Steve, I might just add that, you know, every opportunity with Greater Louisville Inc., in the newspapers, in conversations with the cabinet secretary, I really made a point that the district's position was going to be based on whether or not our area attained the ozone standard, and that unless we met that, not likely that we would consider removing that control strategy at this point. And so the district has been really clear about our position on that at every opportunity and with all the parties involved.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions regarding the, moving on to the enforcement?
Could I would like to learn and ask a question for my own edification. So I was looking at the PM 2.5 and, you know, it had the summary data, and I was wondering if there was any rationale that could be, you know, that caused there to be relatively higher amounts in November and July compared to the rest of the months. I mean, I understand when we talked before about ozone and like summer and, you know, heat and, you know, amount of, you know, sunlight, you know, with VOC production. So what I read about, you know, PM 2.5 is it has something to do with, you know, pollution, wind speed, humidity, population density, coal consumption, green coverage, you know, construction, you know, amount of precipitation. But do we know what the main factor is that drove it higher during those times, so that, you know, compared to the rest of the year?
So, Dr. May, and I'll invite Brian Harris if he's available to be elevated up to help answer this question fully. Billy DeWitt is on vacation. So in July, of course, we have the 4th of July holiday, and we had very high readings during that time period because of ground level fireworks displays. Also this year, like many areas, we saw a very lengthy fireworks season since folks didn't have much else to do than shoot off fireworks. So that's one of the reasons why you'll typically see higher elevated PM during July. With respect to November, we've moved up into lawn leaf management season. So folks may be having some additional burning, which our community compliance report generally supports that we are seeing, you know, greater numbers of people burning things, sometimes in compliance with APCD regulation 1.11 and sometimes not. But that also it's a time when fireplaces are being used, when there is a fair amount of field management going on, cutting of corn, for example, and turning over soil. That does add up to the PM levels as well. So if Brian is available, I invite Brian to provide an additional response.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think you summarized it pretty well. The only thing that I'll add is that, yeah, you know, we do see, particularly during this time of year, November, December timeframe, we do see some upticks in PM 2.5 over the weekend sometimes that are likely related to fireplace usage, residential wood burning. We saw some elevated concentrations the weekend of November 6th through 8th. That was the highest weekend PM 2.5 for the month. So, but for the most part, yeah, what you described is probably the primary cause for some of the higher PM 2.5.
I'll add one thing, if I may. In most parts of the world, in the wintertime, in urban areas, particulate concentrations, PM 2.5 concentrations, particulates created from combustion, do become elevated because in the wintertime, the atmospheric mixing layer, that is the height at which the pollutants mix up to, is lower because there's less solar radiation, that the vertical mixing is just less robust. So you usually see a wintertime peak. In some countries, like in China, where there's a lot of cooking and things that are done with wood and coal, that's really pronounced. But even in U.S. cities, just because there's less air for the pollutants to mix into, there is a bit of a rise typically in the wintertime from whatever sources the pollutants come from automobiles, chimneys, all the ones previously mentioned. That's
Thank you.
And then just one clarification, when we talked about leaf management and, are we talking about all residential then?
So from our, from looking at the complaints that we receive, the complaints are typically about neighbors burning leaves in their backyard. We don't see any complaints that a management company for a lawn service, for example, is inappropriately burning leaves to manage their work volume of leaf cleaning. Did that help?
Yes, so I guess then it would make sense to me that there should be some kind of public information campaign at the end of October or something like that, as a public system then. And that would, I don't think that would be that expensive, though, of course, I don't know. But it's a recurrent problem. We always, we get the complaints, we investigate it, but it's usually over and done by that time, or maybe it's in the middle. So being, on the front end of it would help to minimize it, I would hope. But then I guess you also have to offer some kind of alternative for those persons to do something with their leaves as opposed to burning it.
And I will just echo Dr. Coburn's comments earlier, that it certainly is a combination of unfavorable meteorological conditions combined with likely some increase in emissions.
And Dr. Moody, your point is very well taken. We will, where we are hiring a new communications and as part of our communications strategy, that is certainly a suggestion that we will include in that planning for next fall. Thank you.
Moving on to the enforcement status report. Are there any questions from board members regarding the enforcement status report? I see that we did have one settlement this month, and looks like we have 5 more to resolve on the enforcement status report. Moving on to the excess emission report, could someone tell me, I've looked at that report, and under status it says, what is pays and what is scheduled? What does that mean? Under the excess emission report, it says, under status, it says pays. Then another report, it says schedule. What does that mean?
Andy, if you could elevate Steve Gravett, that would be helpful.
Chairman Hilton, I
Yes.
believe that's the way we track them. DJ's the one that processes that, but the way I remember it being set up is the ones that are passed are ones that we have already evaluated and, have kind of closed them in our system. And the ones that are scheduled are the ones that we're still waiting for other information or we're still evaluating those.
Oh, would it be simpler just say close? I mean,
I wish we were given the power to change things in the system that
Okay.
we've got, but
oh, no
I
problem.
agree with you 100%. It would be
No.
a lot more straightforward.
Thank you. I just noticed that when I was reading through the report. Thank you very much for the explanation. Any other questions from any board members on any of the reports that were distributed electronically? It seems like that we have fulfilled our agenda. I will now adjourn the regular meeting of the board and thank you for your participation. Happy holidays, be safe, and looking forward to see everyone Wednesday, January the 20th, 10 a.m. Thank you very much.